So these people didn't wake up one day and say, let's catch the Windrush. Let's catch the Windrush to Blighty, to the mother country. They were asked to come to the mother country. Asked by us, having been in the Caribbean in the first place, because we took them there by force of arms as slaves. You would have thought that anyone who had a heart would regard our obligation to these people as more than absolute. One would have thought that anyone who had a heart or a scintilla of moral decency within them would consider that we owed these people justice, if not reparation, for their loss. They came here. Many of them came here. They added hugely to the gaiety of public life in Britain. Some of our most famous footballers, some of our most famous musicians, some of our famous politicians, some of our most famous doctors, some of our most famous cultural and creative people are the sons and daughters of that Windrush generation. And yet, far from feeling a moral obligation to them, far from seeking to make reparation to them, it turned out that successive British governments had been silently deporting them because they lacked paperwork. They lacked paperwork they had never been told they needed in the first place. Such a scandal was it that the British Home Secretary Amber Rudd, who I see wants her job back, had to resign as Home Secretary over the head of it. Theresa May, the former Home Secretary, is said to be ashamed of it. And yet, a scandal which ought to be as tall as the Shard has shrunk and been swept away under the carpet. David Matthews has compiled not just his own memoir, but the memoir of many voices of the Windrush generation. And I'm proud to showcase that book this evening on this radio station, because if we forget, if we allow such a scandal to go so quietly into the good night of yesterday's news, then we have no honor left as a nation. We'll be talking in a few minutes to David Matthews, who has compiled Voices of the Windrush Generation. And I've just read the foreword, a very powerful and moving foreword by one of the very great Caribbean gentlemen, Sir Clive Lloyd, CBE. Very powerful and moving indeed. I need from you also suggestions as to appropriate post-power jobs. Imagine some of our best-known politicians going through the revolving door. What should they come out as? We had a suggestion that Theresa May might become a wheat farmer. Others have suggested, in various degrees of colour and off-colour, that David Cameron may already be a farmer. Who knows? Nobody knows where David Cameron even is. Let me read a couple of the texts and tweets before we talk with David Matthews. This from Mark in Bournemouth, Brexit Battalion, we are Legion. George, May is dithering simply because if she made any deal with the EU this month, the DUP would vote down the budget, forcing her resignation. In my worthless opinion, the DUP should vote the budget down regardless. And Bob Justice says, George, jobs for politicos. Theresa May, hostage negotiation. Boris Johnson, TV remake of the Benny Hill Show. Jeremy Hunt, Chinese gift shop. Gavin Williamson, the SAS. Chuka Umona, a jelly deal stall. And Alistair Campbell, a centrifuge factory. Now, David Matthews, celebrated author and journalist and compiler of this new work, Voices of the Windrush Generation, joins us now. David, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, George.
The question I pose is, why are we not talking about this anymore?
That's a very good question. I think in some ways what happened when the furore over this total scandal kicked up earlier this year, and bear in mind, as you well know, this has been going on for years, so it's not really
successive governments. Yeah,
exactly. But when it blew up, I think that there was a sense that after it seemed like the dust was settling, in terms of us coming to terms with the problem and facing it, what seemed to happen was that this generation of hard-working, stoical people, of which my parents were part, who had been ignored for so long, all of a sudden moved into this kind of weird sort of British institution, good immigrant sort of kind of characterization. Mm-hmm. It was almost like we thought, oh, right, okay, we've had a bit of a celebration at Westminster Abbey. The Prime Minister had a few words. We lost our Home Secretary over it. Job done. Let's sort of move on.
Yeah.
I think that's what's I think in some ways that's what's happened.
But there are reasons why that's not good enough. Some of them tangible, some of them intangible. The tangible are that justice has not been secured for those who suffered injustice in this scandal. And the intangible is the ongoing necessity of demanding respect for people who have been treated so shabbily with so little justification.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree with you more. Sadly, both my parents have passed away. My mum died, in fact, earlier this year. They came here in 1962. They, of course, wound up spending more time working, living, rearing a family and committing themselves to this country than they did in their homeland. And I feel in some ways, that, and of course it was one of the many motivations for doing the book in the first place, that, that I felt a need to pay sort of homage, if you like, to them, because, as you just pointed out, tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that now constitute this wider, Windrush community in this country, of which I sort of now include myself, have not been given the respect that we are due, and quite frankly, the treatment of those that have really seen the worst of what the Home Office or the state can mete out has been absolutely deplorable.
Tell us about the book.
So, all that said, what I wanted to do with the book was really avoid the scandal, insofar as I didn't want to, if you like, have the community mired, or again just sort of, categorised by doom and gloom and whatnot. Like I said, in part in paying homage to my parents and their generation and their contemporaries, I wanted to just give a voice to people who have largely been voiceless. And I say that not just in terms of the wider community not really knowing what the Windrush generation went through, even people like myself, the children of the Windrush generation, many of us have never really fully comprehended or understood where our parents came from, what they came to, and what they had to sacrifice in that process, because a lot of the time our parents just didn't say anything. You know, they just got their head down and got on with it. And when you asked them about it, they were like, you know, it's kind of, that's life. They had an agenda, if you like. Like I say, they got their heads down and they just got on with it. So it takes, and it took quite a lot of probing to get out of people just really the conditions that they faced when they got here, how they got on with people, how they didn't get on with people a lot of the time, the discrimination that they faced. But of course, on the positive side of it, how they worked together, they lived together, they bought houses, they built families, and I would say they kind of revolutionised the cultural landscape of Britain.
Without a doubt, places like Notting Hill, where many went to live, not many can afford to do so now, is in a way remembered every year at the Notting Hill Carnival, isn't it?
That's right, and often people think that Carnival is just a sort of jump up, and a kind of excuse to drink one too many red stripes. But of course, it celebrates historically the emancipation of slaves throughout the slave-owning diaspora, if you like. But also, it celebrates in a more contemporary sense the arrival and the lives of people from the Caribbean, or sort of specifically what was the British West Indies, if you like, back in the day. And I think that for all of it, for all the criticism that Carnival gets, if you think about it, if you sort of take all the kind of, the surface sort of side of it, the party bit, if you put that to one side for a moment, what it actually celebrates and recognises is really a tremendous tale of triumph over adversity, really. And I think that, regardless of what people say about Carnival, I'm a massive supporter of it.
What would you say are the main problems, specific problems, because everybody's got problems, of the children now of the Windrush generation, and even their children in Britain today?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think what has happened, and I was reminded of this the other day when I came across that, again, another awful story about the GCSE sociology book that castigated Caribbean fathers for being absent and feckless and all this sort of rubbish. I was reminded that we are, we're often seen in a way as being a sort of atomized group of people disconnected from the ruck and roll of mainstream sort of society, the other. But that's kind of, on the one hand, that's part of, or the legacy of migration. We see it now in China, in India, in Eastern Europe. Hundreds of thousands, millions of people the world over are moving from one place to another for economic reasons, and as a result of that, they wind up leaving their children behind, or the children are having to be raised by, grandparents, and so on and so on and so forth. And this, of course, happens to the West Indian community, or the African Caribbean community in this country, not because of something in our DNA. It's purely economics. So what we face now is that increasingly, because 70 years down the line from the arrival of the Windrush, we're still having to deal with institutionalized racism. We're still having to do with structural inequality. And much of that has come from, in part is connected to a generation that, like I say, they got their head down, they had to work hard, they had to make sacrifices for that. And I think in some ways, yes, that has impacted on further generations.
Well, I've got a caller. Stay on the line, David, because I've got a caller on this subject. Andrew in Burton-upon-Trent. Andrew, welcome. Your son was treated badly. We know that he had real difficulties encountering some of the things that David is talking about and has written about. What would you like to say?
Yeah, hi George, hi David.
Hi.
I have 4 children who are black, and throughout their lives they have had to struggle. One is now a doctor, wanted to be a surgeon, but has opted to eventually end up as a GP because when she went to Oxford University, suffered humongous racism, and when she went to the surgery team on her rota to be a doctor, was told, unless as a woman you've got no chance to be on our team, and as a black woman you must sleep with all of us first before you'll get anywhere in surgery, which she reported, and there were people taken to task, but it put her off, so she ended up being a GP. My son, another black child, walking along the road in a mainly white predominant area, was stopped 6 or 7 times by the police and accused of being part of different crimes purely because, in my opinion, when I went to court as somebody who had fought for this country and explained to the judge that the police were harassing my son, who was actually charged with quite serious offences, the judge, and I actually wore my medals on my chest, the judge actually berated the police in what they'd done to my son, because in effect they'd ruined his life. He now has to work in a factory, and he was a very bright student. So I have fought all my life, and I very much associate with what David's saying, from a Windrush generation, and you were talking about it earlier, George, about the problems in London, black on black crime, black on black associated with drugs, and still we go on. Still, black children